So welcome everybody. My name's Amanda Aliberti. I'm a social worker at Adoptions from the Heart, and we are really excited because today we are sitting down with two amazing women, Samantha and Hope, who both are birth mothers. So welcome, ladies.
Thank you.
Do we want to start by maybe each of you introducing yourselves, talk a little bit about your connection to adoption? Samantha, would you like to go first?
Sure. I placed my daughter Charlotte in April of 2019, so she's a year and a half. It was an unexpected pregnancy. It was an emergency placement, I guess they call it. So I placed her while I was in the hospital. And our relationship has grown from there, and I love adoption. I think it's awesome, and learning about open adoption for myself it's very hard, but it's also very beneficial for everyone.
Great. And Samantha, can you just touch on what your open relationship looks like with the family?
So we email at least once a month. They'll send me pictures of her and how she's doing. And then we have 2 visits a year.
Great. And how about you, Hope?
Yes. So again, thank you for having me. I placed my son for adoption over 7 years ago. So it's been an interesting and, windy up and down 7 years for sure. But I, much like Samantha, had an unplanned, unexpected pregnancy and decided to place my son for adoption. I have a very open adoption. In our contract, it says I am able to see him 2 to 3 times a year. With COVID, that has not happened. So I'm really missing him. I usually see him on his birthday and my birthday, and then a trip in between. And that is, I missed his birthday, and that's a really big bummer, but hopefully the world will be clear soon and I can see him again. But open adoption and a little over 7 years out.
Great. So I'm hoping each of you, if you're okay with sharing, can talk a little bit about how you felt at that moment when you found out you were pregnant, maybe how far into your pregnancy you were, and what thoughts were going through your mind when you were contemplating adoption. Go ahead, Samantha.
Okay. So I didn't find out I was pregnant until literally giving birth. I was in labor, and I remember it so vividly. It's like kind of like a nightmare because it was so terrifying. I didn't know what was going on. We went to the hospital and they confirmed it. And like, I knew right then that I just couldn't parent. It just wasn't in the cards right then. And my parents were with me, and we made the decision. We met Amanda, and it just went from there. But it was very quick and a whirlwind of emotions, and it was terrifying because I didn't know anything about adoption, and I kind of put my trust into Amanda. But it's good now.
How about for you, Hope?
Yeah, so I found out when I was right around 20 weeks pregnant. So not the full pregnancy, but still later on. And I got really sick. I was in college. It was during finals time and I got really sick. So I drove home to my mom's house, which was typically a 2-hour drive. And it took me a lot longer than that because I kept having to pull over to sleep. And because I was just exhausted and sick. And I went into the clinic and they actually gave me an x-ray because I had been told my freshman year of college that I would have trouble getting pregnant. So I didn't even think that was an option. And during that time period, my mom had been diagnosed with breast cancer. So I wasn't really sexually active. So that thought just never came to my mind. So I actually found out I was pregnant because an x-ray tech saw a skeleton on the x-ray. And I just remember when they came up to me, I was in disbelief. And I didn't think that it was possible or true, or that I was living in a dream. And, I was 20 weeks, I think it was 20 weeks and 3 days. So I just remember being like, what are my options? What are my options? What do I, please just tell me what my options are. Like, what can I do here? Because I didn't know, you know, and a lot of people get mixed emotions about this, but I actually did go to an abortion clinic down south, and I went just a couple days after I found out I was pregnant, and I was just on the cusp of when an abortion could be done there, because in Minnesota you can't do it after a certain time. And I just remember, I am pro-choice, which is, but in that moment, I just made a decision for myself that I couldn't do that. I made the choice to carry him to term rather than making the other decision. And adoption just kept coming up as a conversation. And I think there were just a couple moments where I had really important people in my life who were like, Hope, can you really do this, or should you really be doing this? And, I wanted the best life that he could have. And I was a college student with, $5 in my bank account and bartending, and, wanted a better life for him. So opted to go the adoption route. And I ended up actually living with the woman who adopted him. Met her, crazy story. Her adoption book showed up as an ad on Google, clicked it, thought this is who I want to be when I grow up. Met her and ended up living with her the last 2 months of my pregnancy. So it was a wild adoption road. And getting to the adoption choice, I went from possibly considering abortion to possibly parenting adoption, possibly parenting adoption. So it was a windy road, but here I am.
It sounds like a roller coaster for sure. You kind of touched on this a little bit, but I'm curious what type of support you both had in your lives at that point. Who was there by your side? Who did you feel comfortable talking with? And did you feel any pressure from people to not place your child for adoption?
Yeah, I can jump in.
Either one.
I actually hid my pregnancy from outside of my nuclear family. So like my brothers and sisters, mom and dad, and then a couple friends. I hid that I was pregnant, which was one of the reasons I moved. So there were some reactions from my good friends, from like the 4 people I told, where, one of my friends had just had a baby, so she wanted me to keep the baby. One of my friends is like, no, like, you're not doing this. So it was such a mixed gamut. And I think most of the people in my family thought that adoption would be the best route. So the support system going into it, I mean, they were there for me, but it almost always felt like adoption was just the only option for me, right? I did have, a couple people in my life, my dad, my biological dad, who was not happy about it. But for the most part, everybody was very, adoption heavy for sure.
How about for you, Samantha?
So I mean, my story is a little bit different just because I didn't make the choice until I was in the hospital. So I as soon as they told me that I was pregnant, I was like, I knew that I couldn't take care of this child, and I'm living at home. I'm not working. I'm not financially stable. I'm not mentally stable. So I honestly, like, it was just a gut feeling, and I kind of just like spit it out. I was like, I can't parent this. I can't parent this child without really talking to anyone else. Like, my parents were there, but they were like, okay, like, I think we all kind of knew that that was the best option. And most of the people around me did support me. I did have a friend who didn't support me because she was convinced that this child could change my life for the better, and because that's what her kids did for her. And I get that, but not for me. Um, but I mean, I had really good support. So,
Yeah, I mean, I think as women, there's a lot of preconceived notions of what we should do and when we should do it, right? And it's hard because I think everybody has their opinion, and it sounds like both of you were lucky enough that you did have positive people in your life for the most part, that were able to support the decisions that you made. Not everybody is so lucky or fortunate, right? Because a lot of people struggle because oftentimes people are against their decision. So it's hard. It's really hard when you're facing an unplanned pregnancy and trying to figure out what's the best path. So I'm happy that you both had that support in your lives. Can you touch a little bit on when you guys were choosing the adoptive family? And it sounds like Hope, the adoptive mom, fell into your lap. But what went into your thought process of what type of family you wanted to raise your child? Like, how did that decision making go for each of you?
for me, I had no idea what I wanted. I was like, Amanda came into the hospital with so many families, and I'm like, how am I supposed to choose? Like, everyone is so perfect. And I mean, I think the family that I wound up choosing is really because my parents came across them and they fell in love with them. They go camping, they do a bunch of outdoor stuff, and they were kind of just like us, like a little family. And it was mom and dad and a little girl, just actually that's just like my family. So, which is funny. But I was also between a single dad, and then I realized that I wanted a mom and dad, a whole family to raise my daughter. And so once my parents said that they love them, I was like, I'm sold. Like, I was just so happy. And like every time we meet each other, it's just like a reminder as to why I chose them. Like, they're so awesome. And I really couldn't ask for a better family.
So, as I already said, I mean, I had been Googling stuff about adoption, and her adoption book just showed up, and she actually is a single mother by choice. And originally, when I decided on adoption, I wanted to be as far away from where I lived as possible because I thought that having him too close would be too hard. And I had talked to one or two families that had been like self-matched type, or like family members said, hey, I know this person who's adopting, and none of those panned out. And the big thing for me was I want them either on the East Coast or the West Coast. Like, I'm in Minnesota. He's got to be far because it's going to be too hard for him to be close. So most of the families that I was looking at were on those two sides of the spectrum. And it just so happened that, when I saw his mom, when I saw her book, everything inside me was like, this is who I want to be when I grow up. Like, I wanted to, I want to be this way. I want to, have this type of philosophy of life and all these different things. And so after I met her, there was really never a question that if I was to go this route, I wasn't going to choose her. And yeah, I did end up going to live with her because I hid my pregnancy, and, I didn't want to go to a maternity home. My grandma didn't even know I was pregnant. So it was like, where do I go? And it just kind of worked out that I went there. But it's interesting because the geography piece, choosing the too far away places, I ended up moving to California. That's where he lives for a couple years. And I was right to trust my gut and try to stay far away, because being close, what for me was even more hard than being like, I lived in London for 2 years, and being in California and living so close and yet not being able to be a part of his everyday life was so impossible and traumatic, and I couldn't do it. So I was right. My gut instinct was right when I was pregnant to choose far away places.
Well, it's interesting you say that because it just goes to show that every birth parent is different. Everyone deals with this in a different way. They process things in a different way, and things work for some that may not work for others. So I can appreciate you being honest that that's what you wanted. I'm curious, Samantha, do you have any reaction to that? 'Cause we've
I
talked a
do,
lot about.
because I feel like, again, I didn't know anything going into this. So I didn't know if I wanted a family who was going to be close or who was going to be far. And at the end of the day, I'm happy they're like 6 hours away. So there's no chance of us running into each other, which honestly is one of my biggest fears. Like being at the store and seeing them, like I don't think I could have chosen someone who was close to me either. I think that would be too hard, and just I would be on my mind constantly. Am I going to see them while I'm out? So I'm happy that my family is farther away.
Samantha, can you share a little bit with Hope about the experience when you first decided on adoption? You initially wanted more of a closed adoption, and that
Hmm.
time. Can you share a little bit of what you went through?
Yeah. So I actually did grow up kind of around adoption, and I didn't even like put two and two together until just recently. Um, but I didn't even really know what an open adoption was, but I didn't think I wanted that because I thought it was going to be too hard to like see pictures of her and me not be there with her. And so I wanted a closed adoption initially, and so happy I didn't choose that. That would just like kill me entirely because I just love seeing the pictures and love hearing stories about what she's doing. And um so I mean, I guess closed adoption is good for some people, but for me it wouldn't be.
On that. So I actually, Samantha, it's interesting because when I was starting to look through the adoption process, I thought I wanted something that was more closed as well. And it was a similar reason. Like I thought it was going to be too hard. And luckily, I had people who really described to me what closed adoption was and like how, damaging it can be for both the
Uh-huh.
birth mother and the child, right? So it's interesting that you felt that because I felt that too. Obviously, I opted for open, and that's what my son's mom wanted too. She wanted him to know who his birth parents were and who his birth family was and all of that. But I want to just jump on like quick the geography thing. This is I was in San Francisco and he was in LA. And I was traveling to LA for work all the time. And I had one of the an opposite reaction where I wanted to see him as much as I could. And I kind of had, moments where I would literally, just beg, like, please, I just need to see him. Like, can I meet you guys at the park and things like that? And I wanted so much more than I ever thought I would want while I was pregnant. So I had to move away because I couldn't do that to myself anymore. Like wanting so bad to see him and just not being able to. But
Can I just say that it's so weird, like hearing your story because I've read your book. And so I'm like, oh my gosh, wait, this is so familiar.
oh well, thank you for reading it.
Yeah.
These stories probably sound very familiar.
Yeah.
Yeah, Hope, when I
Oh,
had reached out to Samantha and I had asked her to do this podcast, I mentioned your name, Hope, and she's like, "Wait, Hope Baker? I read her book." And that's so
oh, I
exciting.
love that. Well, thank you for reading it. I hope it, helped you or,
Yeah, I did.
I think that the it's interesting because when I was pregnant and when I had just placed, I felt like I didn't have those type of resources. And I think they were probably out there, but I wasn't looking in the right places. So it's been really nice. A lot of birth mothers have come to me and said, this is one of the first things that I've ever read, or, if you listen to it on Audible, listened to by another birth mother. And so it was just really traumatic to write that book, but I'm glad that, you read it and other people are reading it and finding maybe some helpful tips, or just not feeling as alone as maybe you did before.
I think that that's a very common feeling that birth mothers have, is this sense of feeling alone. And I think that's why having a community around you that you can feel comfortable and safe to share your feelings is really important. And there are not a lot of birth parents out there that are connected to other birth parents. Um, for Samantha, we have a monthly support group here for birth moms. We've started it a few years ago, and every month these women come together. Now it's through Zoom because of COVID, but women come together and just chat about how they're feeling, the good, the bad, everything. There are moments where everyone's happy and talking about their visits and their kids, and then there's moments that they're sad and struggling with something, but it's an opportunity to lean on one another. So it sounds like, Hope, you didn't necessarily have that sense of community when you were placing.
Definitely not. It's interesting because there are millions of birth mothers in America. And for some reason, we all, well, not for some reason, we know why, right? I mean, there's birth mothers, like I know that I felt shame and guilt, and I hid my pregnancy, and I hid that I'd placed my son for adoption for years after he was born. I wrote an anonymous blog for 3 years before he was actually born. So even my friends from college, my aunts, my uncles, they didn't know that I had a baby until like 3 years later. So I get it. Like, there are millions of us in just America alone, not even talking about the world. And for some reason, because of that shame and guilt, a lot of us stay in hiding, and a lot of us stay silent. And because of that, I feel like it's wonderful that you guys are doing a support group, because I think that those are what's needed, right? And we're still in the shadows. Like, when you look at the triad, birth mother voices are starting to get listened to more. But I'm in groups, I'm in groups all the time, just reading people's comments and trying to provide my perspective from a birth mother, and I get shut down all the time from adopted parents saying, no, you don't know. And I'm like, I do, because I'm a birth mother. Like, you have to start listening to us, because we're not going to be in the shadows forever. And I really like that, support groups are becoming so prevalent. And I'll tell you what, when I lived in London, I was there for a little over 2 years, and I tried to get into multiple support groups. And these support groups, I never was able to get in one. They wanted all of this documentation, they wanted adoption paperwork, they wanted all of this stuff to prove that I was actually a birth mom for whatever reason. And they made it so hard for me to just get help. And there were points where I was like, I need support. Like, I'm on a decline right now. I'm like circling the drain. Like, I need support. I need support from people who understand what I'm going through, or are trained to help me. And in London it was impossible. So at least in the States there are more support groups, but I actually didn't go to my first support group until COVID, because typically they're in person. And I think, although I'm now in the adoption community and open, and I have my book, but I just had never gone to a support group. And because of COVID, I was able to attend multiple different support groups because they opened them up to everybody else. So it was like, okay, wow, this is crazy. Like, my first support group was on, I can't remember who hosted it, but there were birth mothers all the way from 80 years old to 19 years old.
Wow.
It was insane. It was just insane. And one of the women, who was an older woman, I think she was like in her 60s, that was her first support group she'd ever been to, ever. And I just, I didn't have that support while I was pregnant, of people who actually, could guide me through adoption, much like I'm sure you, Amanda, did with Samantha. Like, adoption, so you can help kind of prepare her, and then post placement and all these things. And my adoption was private. So I didn't get any of that. I had like a 1 hour meeting with a social worker, and my lawyer is telling me, because in California I was legally entitled to a lawyer. So it was all about the contracts and all that. So I never had post placement support. I never had adoption education before and after. I never had that. So now all of a sudden being able to join support groups and, being able to connect with other birth moms because of my book and because of Instagram, like it's so incredible. And I really hope that any birth mothers who will listen to this will get support, go to support groups and try to get support, because you can't survive this without it. Like, you can't live a healthy life without support from people who understand what you're going through.
Yeah.
Nobody gets this. Like, even like my mom, she like I always, like, she lost a grandchild too. Like, she did. My son was the first grandbaby, and that's hard for her, but she'll never understand what I feel like. As much as she may want to support me now, and like, nobody will ever get it unless they're a birth mom. Like, you just don't. So you have to, I think it's so important to find other birth moms, because even if they have different situations, like, they understand that pain, that in a way that nobody will ever understand unless they're a birth mom. They can't understand it.
Samantha came to her very first support group. I think it was what, a week or 2 weeks after?
It was like a week and a half after I gave birth, and it was terrifying. I mean, I've always like gone to therapy, but this was like so different. I've never been in like a setting like this, and I mean, I really didn't want to go. I was terrified. But I'm so happy I did, because the women that I have met, and they're just so awesome, and like being surrounded by a group of people who know exactly what you're feeling and what you're going through is so beneficial to it was beneficial to my healing. And I mean, without that group, I don't know where I would be.
2 weeks after, I'm so jealous.
Yeah.
I'm like sitting here thinking what my life, not that I don't regret any decisions I ever make in my life, but how different my life would be if I would have had, worked with someone like Adoptions in the Heart or an agency that provided support 2 weeks after. Like, it breaks my heart that there's people out there like me who were in private adoptions who didn't necessarily work through an agency, and they don't get support. And I'm glad, Samantha, that you have that.
And Samantha has come so far to watch her journey and the work that she put into healing, because it is a healing process, because there's grief involved, there's loss involved. And Samantha really put in the work to come to these groups, talk through how she's feeling. And the person she is today is very different than the person when she placed and when she walked into this room for the very first time. So I agree with both of you, and I appreciate everything you're saying, Hope, because I think that is our message that we're trying to put out there. There is a sense of community. There are other women and men out there that you can connect with. And working with an agency or a social worker or a counselor is really crucial, because this is hard stuff. This is not easy. And you want to make sure you have the right supportive services around you. So I appreciate you saying that.
I just want to comment on that quick. I would never suggest to a birth mother or an adoptive parent to not work with some type of agency, because I saw how damaging it was for, as a birth mother, how damaging it was. Like, I would never suggest to anybody a private adoption. I know people like to go that route because I think there's less oversight, but I would never suggest a private adoption to somebody if there is no type of like services in place, like services you offer, because it is cruel and unfair to just have a birth mother have nothing after, go from expectant mom to a birth mom and have no support, nothing built in, no education, nothing. It's wrong. It is fundamentally wrong. So I'm all about, agencies and education and ethically, operated agencies. So just wanted to add that in.
Yeah. I mean, people think that women place babies and then just disappear, but in actuality, the most crucial point to all of this is post-placement and making sure you have supportive services after you place. So I can't imagine not having that, right? Because it's so important to the growth of what's happening here. So I like that. I wanted to read a quote that we had here from Hope's blog that I think is really powerful in talking about the idea of frustrating moments or possibly having regret. So I want to read this and just ask your reactions to it. This feeling of living in a parallel universe is not just a one-time feeling, at least for me. I'm reminded of it every holiday, every celebration, and I'm reminded of it every holiday, every celebration, and sometimes random times on random days. My worst, her best. My worst, her best. This reality can land hard. It can feel like you're drowning, desperately bobbing in a sea of your own decisions, and you don't know when you're going to come up for air again. I think that's a really powerful statement, and I'm curious, Samantha, what is your reaction to that?
Yeah, when I heard that, I was like, this is exactly how I feel. Like literally like every time there's like a celebration of whatever, I'm just like, but it's not. It is, but it's not at the same time. And it's like, I don't know.
It's okay. Take your time. Take your time.
I don't know. It's just hard because like we want the best for our children, but also like I want my child here, but I know it wasn't really an option at the time. And I mean, I don't know, we just want the best for our children, but it's very hard.
Hope, can I ask you I know you wrote the statement, but what you meant by that?
I think the day I go back to even just thinking about the birth, and Samantha, I totally feel what you're feeling. And I think one of my main thoughts behind that statement is you go back to the day that your child was born, and my son's signing those papers, I signed the papers while I was still in the hospital. And I just think about that moment. Like, that was my worst moment in my life. I don't know if anything will ever be worse than that. I hope not. And that was her best moment of her life. In that moment, she got her son. She got a child that she's been longing for. And I think that those moments happen a lot in adoption. My worst and scariest and saddest moments are her happiest moments. I mean, her first Christmas with him. Oh God, I can't even. My first Christmas I spent crying. I was a mess. And every Christmas since, like, those are her happiest moments. And they're my saddest moments out of the year, these holidays. And it's hard to live in that world where you're trying to balance, Christmas is supposed to be a great day, right? It's supposed to be a fun day, or Hanukkah, whatever you celebrate. Like, it's supposed to be good days. And as a birth mom, at least for me, those turned into really scary days, because I knew on holidays and on birthdays and on Mother's Day, God, Mother's Day is always a challenge, but those are turned into just these hardest days where I'm crying and I'm a mess. And I just think of, I want my son to be happy. So I don't project that on him. If I, send him a video, I'm happy, I'm smiling, but it's such a parallel universe. Her happiest moments are moments that I missed. And although I'm happy that he is living the life he deserves and he's living a happy life, and I was a woman in crisis who made the best possible decision with all the information I had at the time, it's hard. It's hard to live in that moment. And it's hard to look back and know that, gosh, like, my worst day of my life was her best day. Like, it's just, it's just challenging to live in that.
People often will say that the act of placing a child for adoption is extremely selfless, right? You're putting your child's best needs, best interests, best future ahead of everything that you can be feeling at that moment. And I think that that struggle continues on, and the pain that you continue to feel in those moments when they're having happiness is part of being a great parent, right? Because you're putting your child's needs before your own emotions. And that doesn't stop at the hospital when you deliver and when you place and when you sign paperwork. That goes on forever. And I think a lot of birth mothers say the same thing that you're both saying, that those days, those moments where you're happy for them, you're struggling because you're losing out, and you suffer through that pain for the well-being of your child. And that makes a really great parent. And even though you're a parent in a different way, you're still a part of that child's life.
Yeah, I think people think that like you give birth and you get to go live your life and go to college or go do whatever. And, my son's mom has even made comments to me about that. Like, oh, you don't have to change diapers and you get to go have fun and you get to go party and go live your life and all these things. And I hear that all the time from people. It's like they think that a human can have a child and then just shut it off and forget and then it's over. Like, I don't know how many times people have just said, just get over it. You, how do you ever get over it? You can find ways to heal. You can do the work that Samantha, you're doing and I'm doing to heal and to try to find ways to deal with your triggers and your emotions, but you don't get over that. Whether it's, it is, you're putting your child before your needs. Or maybe you're putting your needs first too, when I can't be mom, like I can't do this. I'm not ready. And that's okay too, if that's your choice. Like you can, if that's the reason. But I think the world expects mothers, and I finished listening to The Girls Who Went Away. And all of these women, I don't know if either of you have read that or listened to it. It's traumatic if you're a birth mom to listen to it. And I had a lot of breakdowns, but like moments where I was screaming in my car, just after someone would tell a story, like screaming while I was driving, couldn't control it. But I think that people just expect birth mothers to get over it. And you hear that all the time, and you can't just get over it. And you never will, but you can find ways to heal and to work through it. So, I wish society would stop telling birth mothers to get over it. Yeah. Because you can't.
Any reactions, Samantha?
Yeah, I agree with everything that she just said. It's an everyday struggle, I think, for me, and it's something that I'm learning to cope with, and it's definitely not something you just move on with. It's part of your life, and they're your child still and always. And it's not, if people think it's like easy, it's not at all.
Can I ask, have either of you thought about the idea of going on to have other children in the future, and what you're feeling about that, what your viewpoints are?
Well, honestly, before Charlotte, I never saw myself as having children ever. I just saw myself as being a cat mom. But now I can see myself having children when the time is right, when I'm financially stable and can provide a home that I want to provide for my future children. But then there's also that part of me where I'm like, what are they gonna think? What is Charlotte gonna think, like, when she's older? Like, I don't know. Like, it's back and forth. Like, I do want children in the future, but I'm also terrified of Charlotte being like, well, why couldn't you have me? And I don't know.
What are your reactions to that, Hope?
Yeah, I feel the same way. I mean, I never, which is why when I was pregnant, it was such a shock to people, because I never thought I wanted kids, nor did I think that it would be, I couldn't have kids, right? I didn't think it would be just let's get pregnant type situation. So, that was never in the cards for me either. And I think after my son was born, I just thought I had like, I call them funerals. Like I had funerals for my future children that I never thought I would be able to have, because I thought that, how could I do this to my son? How could I look him in the face and say I love you and you were enough? It wasn't you, it was me. But then these kids were enough. So it was just like it's such a struggle that I go through all the time. And when I moved to London, I got engaged to a man who had children. And then I had to go through that, like, process. How do I explain to him that now I have stepkids? And, I chose a person who has stepkids, and I love them. And then, we went through a time where we thought we would have a kid. And I'm like, okay, I'm not sure how I process this, because I don't ever want him to be angry. And I know that he's going to feel however he's going to feel. I can't control it. That's one thing that I have learned through this is I cannot control how he feels, how his mom feels, how anybody else feels. All I can control is how I'm going to react. And if I'm going to come from a place of understanding, or if I'm going to come from a place of like anger and all of these different things. Like that is one thing I've learned. So when I think about having another kid, it scares I was going to swear, but I won't. It scares me. It scares me to think about having another kid and, having him be angry and upset. And I don't know if he would be, but I have to think that somewhere in his mind, he would be thinking, why wasn't I good enough? Because adoptees struggle with trauma that I'll never understand. If you're not an adoptee, you'll never understand. It's the same thing with birth parents, right? Nobody ever will understand. And I have a lot of adoptees who are friends now. And some of the things they say, I'm like, wow, I would have never thought that would make you upset or that would cause a trigger. But there's just so many things. So I don't know if I'll ever have children. At one point, I thought I was going to with my partner, who we're not together anymore. Still love him, and he's a big part of my book. So it's funny when people bring up my book, and I'm like, yeah. So a huge part of that book is now not in my life, but still happy that took place. But I think if I were to have another child, like I would need to, call Amanda, you to get in some support groups right away.
Love
because
to
it is
actually next week we would love to have you join in and talk to some of the other girls, because some of them have gone on to have other children, and they did go through those moments that both you and Samantha are sharing, but I think ultimately they felt like this was what was right for them. They were able to work through the emotions, talk with the adoptive families of their children. And what I hear from women is that ultimately they're going to be there to talk with the child they placed. So they feel like when the time is right and that child is old enough, they will be able to have those conversations and reassure them that it's not that they were not enough. But
Yep.
that's a personal decision. Everyone's entitled to their feelings. It's kind of an open-ended question, food for thought. I know for you girls, it's probably something you're thinking about, and you just have to kind of work through it for sure.
There's no right answer here.
Correct. And there's no right way of solving it either.
No, and one thing I do want to say quick on that is, like, what I've learned is it's okay to be selfish. Like, I feel like not selfish, having another child isn't selfish, but it's okay to put your needs above your children's needs. Like, my son is the most important person in my entire life. But if I have a desire to have a child, like I should listen to that and we'll work through the rest. So I just, I used to be under the impression that I couldn't do that because I couldn't hurt him. And now I'm like, well, hold on a second, because I still matter. Like my wants and desires still matter, right? Like I can't ignore those just because of this. Like if I choose this, then we figure it out and we work it out.
Yeah. Samantha, I know we've talked a lot over the last year or so, I would say at this point, of kind of what the future looks like for you. Can you share a little bit of like what your hopes are, what your dreams are, what you want to use your experience in a positive way to get to?
Yeah, I want to do what Amanda does. I think, like Hope was saying earlier, like there's not enough birth moms like that we know of. Like there are a lot, but we just don't know it. And I think I want to be someone who helps other birth moms along their journey in some way. I don't know how, but I just like want to be a part of something bigger where it's gonna help other people who I I'm sorry, my words.
Oh, you're good.
um um I just want to be able to use my experience and help other people.
Yeah. So, Hope, one of the major goals of the support group is to talk about what does the future hold, right? So, their adoption is not just about the current state, right? It's about what is my life going to look like in the future. And I think one of the goals we have is for women to be able to figure out what path they want to be on so that they can further themselves and feel empowered and move forward. And I know for Samantha, every time I invite her to participate in some sort of adoption advocacy work that we do here, she leaves feeling really good about herself. And she always tells me, I feel really good about this. I want to continue with that. So that leads into the conversation of what pushed you to kind of create this platform that you've created for yourself with your book, with your website, with your blogging and your podcasting. Like, how did you get into that space? Because you've done amazing things from what Samantha and I have looked at. And I'm just curious, like, what pushes you and motivates you to do all that?
I think it goes back to how I felt in my first years post placement. And I just think about all the moments that I felt so alone, so misunderstood. And I never wanted anyone to feel that. And I don't know, I've always been somebody who shares her experiences. So it just made sense for me that that would be what I did. And, because I was in hiding for 3 years, I had to do it anonymously. And as soon as I was able to come, kind of come out, that's what I always call it, like my birth mother coming out story. And like things changed. I started to get messages from women who placed their children, women who decided to parent, women who, like children who were adopted, and not all of them were nice. Um, a lot of adoptees had very negative feelings about some of the things that I was writing, which is that's okay, right? I can't control that. And it helped open up my eyes. But I just, if I never wanted to feel alone, and I didn't want anyone else to feel that way. So when the thought of writing a book kept pressing on my brain, I just decided that I have to do it, and I have to go all in, because this could help. Even if even one birth mother or one adoptee is helped by understanding his birth mom, or one birth mom feels less alone, then it's worth it. And let me tell you, publishing that book was hard. In publishing that book with some of the stuff that's in there was scary, extremely scary. There were things that I put in there that I wanted to take out, because I was like, my boss could read this. Do I really need him to know that I did this, and this, or all of these different pieces? But it wouldn't have been the full story if I wouldn't have told it completely. So it is what it is. But I don't want birth mothers to feel alone. Yeah. And, I'm not out there every single day on the front lines. Like, people like Ashley Mitchell, like they're like literally on the front lines of adoption every single day, like writing bills and adoption from the heart, you guys too, right? Like I'm trying in my way that I emotionally and mentally can. I can't talk about adoption every day. I just can't, because it will drain me, and I will leave the light place I live in, and it'll be challenging to get out. So I have to diversify. So if you look at my Instagram and my blog, there's a lot of stuff going on, because I can't just do one thing. And it's specifically the birth mother life, like it's challenging. So I've really tried to show the full picture, and I know it's been working out so far. So I don't even know if I answered your question.
Oh, you
Because I kind of forgot what it was. That was a long-winded answer too. I don't want birth mothers to feel alone.
yeah.
And it's okay to be sad. Like I wish that people were understood that happiness and sadness are just feelings. Like one is not worse and one is not better. It's okay to be sad.
Yeah.
It's okay to be depressed and need help to get out of that. Like I really want people to see that. I've watched 15 seasons of Grey's Anatomy in the last 2.5 months. And that's like, it is funny because I
I
love
did
the show.
no, I did the same thing.
Yeah, it's just when I go through these moments when I'm like, okay, I got to get things back squared away. Like I realized that I'd watched 15 seasons of 22 episodes a season and 44 minutes an episode in the last couple of months, and that's really bad. So I'm like, okay, how do I do things to kind of get out of that little funk? And now I'm doing things to try to get out of it, but that's okay. Like I want the world to know that, oh my gosh, if you lay on the couch every day and watch Grey's Anatomy after you're done with work or whatever, like it's okay to feel sad. Now, okay, let's try to figure out how to heal. But don't be ashamed of feeling that way.
And that's what I appreciate about you, Hope, and the message you're putting out there is you're not all sunshine and rainbows, right? There's good and then there's bad, and sometimes it's okay to cry, and sometimes it's okay to feel really crappy, because this is hard stuff. Life is hard. Forget about adoption. Life is hard in general, and you're going to come across challenges. So I appreciate that about you, and I feel like you are a huge inspiration to a lot of other women and men out there, for the message you're trying to put forward. And I just felt like Samantha, I just felt like you were connected to Hope. And that's why I wanted to do this podcast with the two of you, because I see this light in Samantha that she wants to just push through and wants to use her experience as you do in a positive way and further her career, incorporating that somehow. So I think we're just so honored that people like you exist because you provide inspiration for other women and men who are in a really tough position, whether it's they just placed or it's been 4 or 5 years and they just still feel stuck and don't have any purpose. So I just want to thank you for putting yourself out there and being courageous enough to share your story, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because it's meaningful. Samantha, do you have any other final words for Hope?
I just want to say thank you for being on here with us. It's just also so crazy again that I read your book at like probably, I don't know how long ago it was, maybe almost a year. When it was, because I got on the waiting list. I'll admit that I was on a waiting list.
Oh my gosh. That is amazing.
So this is really cool.
I love that. Thank you for reading it. Yeah, in one day it'll be a year since it came out.
Yeah, well, and
Craziness.
That is.
sometimes people think, Hope, that like changing the world means you have to do these big extravagant things, but sometimes you can touch the life of just one person, which I know you did for Samantha through that book because she has shared with me. So I want you to know that you have purpose and what you're doing really matters to a lot of people. So we really appreciate women like you.
Well, thank you so much. I feel like now I could go run a marathon or something. Like I just got so hyped up. I really appreciate you having me on. And Samantha, hey, I host a monthly triad table where we do something like this, and I'd love to have you on. You can talk about the things you want to do, and let's try to help you get to where you want to go.
Yeah,
that would be great. And I'm happy to connect you guys if you want to exchange phone numbers or whatnot.
Absolutely. And Amanda, thank you for having me on.
Yeah, well, I hope you take us up on the invitation and we'll join one of our support groups. I'll send you the information.
Send me the info. Would be happy to join.
That's great. Well, it's wonderful having both of you. I always say that, we wouldn't be where we are today if it wasn't for women who are courageous enough to share their story. And it's because of you that adoption has evolved and is getting better, and we're able to provide more resources because we're able to hear from you. So thank you for sharing your story, being honest, and you guys take care of yourself.
Thank you.
Thanks, Amanda. Thanks, Samantha.
Bye.
Bye.